You're listening to Wildlife Control Consultant, where we provide research-based information on all things related to vertebrate pest management. Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of the Wildlife Control Consultant podcast, where we deal with technical information on all things related to vertebrate pest control. Well, thanks for showing up and hanging around, and I hope your week went well. As you may know, as we publish every Friday here on YouTube, sooner on Rumble, but nevertheless, we try to give you options in terms of getting the content that we're putting out. Still fairly busy, but I'm trying to dig out. I have a contract that I have got to fulfill for a protocol for a pest control company, so I am working on that. But nevertheless, if you have ghostwriting needs, you have some research needs, perhaps you have some training issues that you'd like to take care of for your clients, we can do that in person or remote, and also PowerPoint development, and also helping you with your images like watermarking so that you can keep track of your images and also organizing. So you can definitely reach out to me at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Would love to have you take a few moments, if you would, to subscribe to the channel. If you like what you hear, we'd love to hear from you as well. Give us a thumbs up if you're already a subscriber. And, of course, you can put comments and thoughts in the comment section below as well. If you have criticisms, thoughts, perhaps even suggestions for shows, you can also reach out to me directly, of course, at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Well, this week, I thought I would talk a little bit about things that the industry needs. So let me pull up my PowerPoint here and use that as a guide for how we're going to move forward. And what I'm calling these is orphan tools. Now, it's sort of a knockoff from a concept called orphan drugs. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, orphan drugs are those types of medications for very narrow diseases that just don't have enough patience for a pharmaceutical company to spend the money to do the research necessary to come up with a drug to treat that condition. It's where the market is so small. Can understand pharmaceutical companies have to make a profit as well and pay their bills, and it's extraordinarily expensive to come up with new medications. And so you need to have an idea of will the market bear the cost, right? So otherwise someone's going to have to pay it, and that's basically what an orphan drug is. It's those people that have such rare conditions that they can't get some of the medical treatment that they would need simply because there's not enough of them for someone to do the research to make it worthwhile. Okay, so that's the problem. Well, we have the same thing, of course, in the area of wildlife control. We have tools that are kind of needed. I mean, people are getting by. Don't get me wrong on that, right? People are getting by, but it would be so much better if we had these tools around. But the problem is, of course, is there's not a huge market, right? It's not something you're going to sell 100,000 widgets, right? So it's not something you're going to put your kids through college if you're into that sort of thing, or pay for your Bahamas villa. And so it's just going to be something where you can make money, but it's a niche product, right? It's going to be something that you're going to use to fill in the time. You may build 20 to 40 of them, and they're going to sit in the shelf until they're needed, but you're not going to be like sending them out the door. Now, that being said, I do think that there are items that have larger markets, right? So that it could be some pretty good money, right? So nevertheless, it's not something that's going to take care of you and you can just sort of specialize in these sort of orphan tools. So if you're already someone who is, has some time, perhaps you're doing wildlife control in a part of the country where it's really hard for you to go full time, and you're handy and you have access to, welding equipment, perhaps metal bending equipment, or maybe even a 3D printer. This is something you may want to explore, right? Because you're able to produce some of these products when you have some open time, maybe with a slow season, and you can get some of the other retailers out there selling the product for you. Let me sort of make a commitment right here. I'm more than happy to help market you, right? So if you come up with the product and you're going to make sure it's available, I'm going to test you on that, and you're going to have it available. I will make people aware of your business, right? So I have this is something I have sort of a desire in this, because I'm just looking for ways to sort of generate little bits of income, but this is an area I can't get into because of my day job. So nevertheless, I'm putting it out there because I'm really wanting someone to do this, okay? And so I just want to be clear. It's going to be a thin market, right? So I don't want you to think Stevens told me I could make all this money. I'm not saying that, all right? I'm really going to lowball this. I do think over time the market will grow, but I don't want you to think it's a big market straight away. And I just want to remind you the issue of trophic levels, okay? Trophic levels is an environmental principle that says the higher you go up the food chain, the fewer animals there are, the fewer biological organisms there are, right? So we all know that there are going to be more plants than there are insects. There's going to be more insects than there are vertebrates. That's animals with the spine. This is why, in terms of the pest control field, it's always going to be bigger than the vertebrate pest control field. Now, the rule of thumb, don't hold me to it, it's a rule of thumb, is that every time you move up a trophic level, it's 10%. It's only 10% of the previous level. So if there's 100 million tons of plants out there, there's only going to be 10 million tons of insects, and then only 1 million tons of vertebrates. So what that means for us is recognizing that the vertebrate control field will always be a fraction, like a 1/10, of the total pest control market. I was with a colleague, must be 15 years ago now, maybe. We were talking about this, and we were looking at the numbers. We were looking at something from, I think it was one of the major trade magazines for the pest control industry, and the pest control industry was saying that at that time they were about $1 billion in terms of total market revenue. And we were looking around and looking at some of the numbers, and we were like, yeah, it looked like that the vertebrate control field was somewhere around $100 million. Maybe a little bit more, because we were also calculating in the area of USDA Wildlife Services. So it may have been, maybe up to $200 million at that time. But nevertheless, notice that that's 2/10, that's 1/5 of the size of the pest control field. But it's a fraction of the pest control field, right? So just understand that even if you have a gangbuster product in the vertebrate control field, it's always going to be smaller than doing something in bugs, right? Now, that being said, keep in mind that there's a lot more competition in the bug world, right? So that also has to play a part. But just in terms of the total market, what's your potential customer base, these are going to be niche products, okay? So Don't want anyone yelling at me saying you sent me down the primrose path and I'm not making the kind of money I want. I want you to be sure if you're doing this, it's something where I think you can make money, but it's not going to be shooting the lights out and paying for your retirement and all that. Okay, so crunch the numbers. This is something where you have to decide, can you produce the products at a price that the market will bear? Okay. Now, one advantage with niche products is that if it's needed enough, you can almost set your own price within reason, obviously, right? However, it means that you don't have any competition to deal with, so you're not having to worry about someone trying to lowball you, okay? That's one benefit. But nevertheless, because it's a thin market, you have to be sure you're coming up with a product that is really going to help people save time, and enough time that they're willing to pay a premium for your particular item. Or you're able to sell enough of the product where your margins can be lower, but you're still making some money to make your time worthwhile. So be sure to crunch the numbers, right? I'm not asking anyone out there to lose money on this sort of project. I'm going to probably do another podcast down the road for some other ideas I had, but I just picking 3 for this podcast because I think these were ready to mind, and I was just putting them out there, right? So crunch the numbers for yourself. You want to be sure you're able to put out something that's quality. So there's going to be a little bit of time you're going to have to spend producing the product, having it tested. I'm happy to test things that insofar as I can test them, right? Happy to do that. I'm not going to charge for it, right? So I want you to be successful. As I said before, I can't get into these projects because of my day job, okay? So I'm not looking to steal money from you. I'm putting this out there because I want someone to do these things. It needs to be of sufficient quality, right? So a niche product means not something you're just going to make out of, something chintzy that's only going to last for a little while. You want to think of quality, and you want to have good craftsmanship. Lastly, and I've done a podcast on this before, and that is if you're trying to get into the world of vertebrate pest control, you need to be sure that you commit as a manufacturer, you're going to hang in there for at least 5 years. Now, why do I say that? The wildlife control field is foundationally conservative. Now, I'm not referring that in necessarily a political sense, although that may be true. The issue is that they don't adopt new things easily. If you ever see that bell curve, it talks about, the people that are early adopters, and then you have, maybe cutting edge adopters, early adopters, late adopters, really late lagging adopters, right? Wildlife control operators are slow adopters. Now, there's going to be a small portion of them that adopt new things quickly. But as a general rule, they're like farmers, right? It's so expensive. Your time is so valuable that once you find something that works, you're really hesitant to try something new, okay? And so your new item is going to meet with some resistance. That's the first problem. The second problem is that there's not great communication within the vertebrate pest world. It's certainly gotten better in the last 20 years. There's no doubt about that. The advent of different organizations. You also have Facebook and social media, and the ease of the internet has helped. But there are still people that are in niche areas that don't have big businesses, and so they're just simply going along, and they will never go to a convention. They will never go to a training seminar. They just want to be under the radar. It's part of their personality, right? It's a different world. And so you're going to have to understand it's going to take time for your idea, and that for people to become aware of your idea, to even be able to purchase it, right? They can't purchase it if they don't know it exists. So You have to be around long enough, and you got to make sure that you do some marketing. So it's not just if I build it, people will come. They won't. You've got to have a little bit of time into the marketing, and you need to understand that up front. Okay, I think I've lowballed this enough in terms of lowering expectations. And so what are some of the ideas that I think that we need to have products for? So let me start with the first one. The first idea here, and this was something I was talking with a person on the phone about even yesterday, and I thought, that he's right. Let's do this. So I'm not saying this is my idea. I'm saying this is an idea, and we need to have this done. Okay. A prairie dog baiter. Now, if you're not familiar with the management of prairie dog baiting, there's no broadcasting of rodenticide for prairie dogs. Okay, no label allows that. The other problem with prairie dogs, and that is the baits are put out in different ways depending on the product. So for the anticoagulants like Kaput or Rosol, those products have to be placed down the burrow at least 6 inches. And you're using approximately 1/4 cup. If you're doing zinc phosphide based baits, you're saying, well, zinc phosphide's the active ingredient. Why are you doing that? Well, the reason is you have a variety of manufacturers that create zinc phosphide. So it's not like Rosol where Leaf-Attack has exclusive rights to chlorphacinone. Kaput uses diphacinone. Now, diphacinone is not under copyright. Copyright's not the right word. Under patent right now. So other companies do it, but I'm not aware of another company that makes a rodenticide for prairie dogs. Someone can correct me, of course, in the comments. But nevertheless, you have diphacinone, chlorphacinone. Those are your 2 anticoagulants. Both of those products have to be placed down the burrow at least 6 inches below the surface of the ground or below the entrance of the burrow. Zinc phosphide, on the other hand, is a teaspoon that's placed on the surface of the ground in proximity of the burrow. Now, typically, that 1 teaspoon has to be scattered. I think it's a 6-inch diameter area, but not piled. Now, for the zinc phosphide, it's pretty easy. You can just use a dipper and flick it, right? The problem is, of course, is with the Rosol and the Kaput baits. It's difficult to scoop and then put it down the burrow. So, well, why doesn't someone just create a tube, have a tube, and then put a funnel on the top, and then you just simply scoop it? But think about how your hands are being used, right? You have to have something holding the container of bait. You're going to hold the tube with one hand, and then you're going to have to scoop with the other hand to put it down in there. So that means are you using a 2-man team? Now you're increasing the cost of doing the business. Now, if you're on a 4-wheeler, that could work, right? But sometimes it's just easier to walk, right? So the idea being is if you had a reservoir that would hold maybe a gallon, 2 gallons of material, and you could put that on the top, and then you had a measuring section that it would feed into that measuring section that would measure out your 1/4 cup, and then you hit a button that would then allow that to shoot down into your tube into the burrow system. It could simplify the process. So conceptually, it's an easy idea. It just requires there's going to be some mechanics involved here, right? It's not rocket science here, but it's going to take something that's going to have to be balanced and durable enough and useful enough for people to be using into a prairie dog burrow. That's idea number 1. I do think that people would be willing to pay if something was usable. probably over $100 for such a device. Okay, so because when you look at pocket gopher baiters, some of those products are $75 and up from there, right? I don't think there's one below 75. I think I might have saw one for 50, but it was really something almost residential type use. But nevertheless, this is something that needs to be made out of probably durable plastic. There may be a little bit of metal involved, but there's going to be some mechanical materials inside there. And I think some of you are clever enough to be able to do this relatively simply. And, there's a need for this. Okay. So a prairie dog baiter is the first idea I'm putting out there. Not my idea, but idea number 2, and that is inverted T bait stations that are made out of steel. You're saying, well, why do we need them made out of steel? Well, the reason is because there are larger animals on the landscape. Here in Montana, for example, bears are certainly expanding their range. Certainly the grizzly bear is. And you want to be sure that your bait station is strong enough to withstand an attack from a larger animal. That could even be a raccoon. Raccoons are pretty strong. There are PVC pipe inverted T bait stations that are being built right now. People go to the hardware store, get Schedule 40 PVC pipe, and then put together these inverted T stations. Nothing wrong with that. However, if you're a professional and you're maybe wanting to put some bait stations around someone's house that's in bear country, you maybe need to be thinking about using something for steel. You say maybe you're not even baiting animals such as ground squirrels or something larger like that. Maybe you're just baiting mice and rats, right? Then you might need to use steel so that larger animals aren't able to break in, because some of the baits that we're using for these commensal rodents are highly palatable. And animals want that food, and we want to be sure that they can't get a hold of them. So we're looking at steel. Now, maybe steel is too much. Maybe it should be aluminum, right? So, because it's certainly going to be stronger than the plastic. Now, there are some steel bait stations out there now. The box steel, the hard, strong box variety that some manufacturers make for bait stations. But I do think there is a need for inverted steel bait stations, inverted T steel bait stations or aluminum bait stations that could be used for vole control, mouse control, then of course having some designs larger for rats. Now, you want to be sure you're thinking about adding some additional features to this, right? You want to have some anchor points, maybe some sort of rings on it so it can be secured to a pole, so it can be anchored to the ground. You want to have some sort of a locking top. Now, that may be something as simple as just simply having a cap with a screw that has an unusual end to it, right? So someone has to have a key to sort of unwind it. And then sort of like, you see the types of things that are used sometimes in bathroom stalls, right? They'll have different types of screws so that someone just can't take it apart with their Leatherman or something. And then you might want to think about having something that has baffles on it, right? And this is to prevent the grain-based, a lot of times these are grain-based baits, not always, but grain-based baits, so that the grain is not simply spilling out of the ends, because sometimes animals will bulldoze that bait out the other end. That's obviously a higher lift, a larger lift, but some of you folks out there are kind of clever. Maybe you have an idea of moving toward that. Perhaps there's even some slots that you could cut in that someone could add baffles if that was something that they were looking for. But anyways, that is idea number 2, inverted T bait stations that are made out of steel. All right, what's the last idea I'm going to talk about here? This is one of my favorite hobby horses. I am begging someone out there in the industry to do this. I've asked manufacturers, I've done public speaking engagements. I am regularly asking someone, somewhere to do this. Okay, these are hole reducers for your rat-size bait stations. With the advent of 3D printing, this can be done. I'm testing a cover right now for a bait station that a guy in my area built for me with a 3D printer, and we're seeing how whether it will hold up against the sunlight that the front of my house gets. The sun here in Montana can be brutal. Part of that's because of our elevation, where we don't have as much atmosphere cutting through some of that UV ray, and then of course my house is reflecting some of that radiation back as well. But nevertheless, we're testing that. But there are a variety of bait stations out there, and so each bait station needs to have its own cover. Now, I've been wanting it designed a couple of ways. You could have a bait station maybe with a sliding door. When you're dealing with rats, you slide it one way. When you're dealing with mice, you slide it the other way. The problem is that by the way the bait stations are designed now for rats, is that people are using rat-sized bait stations in areas where they know there are no rats. So larger animals like squirrels and ground squirrels are getting into these rat-sized bait stations, grabbing the bait, and that is a non-target poisoning situation, which then becomes a secondary poisoning issue as those animals die from the anticoagulants. Why aren't we as an industry trying to minimize some of that exposure? And this is a very simple thing to do, right? A lot of people like to use the rat-sized bait stations. They're more durable. They're more resistant against dogs and larger animals. But the hole is too big if we only have mice. So what's a simple solution? Have the sliding door is one option. Obviously, that requires a whole new mold, right? The alternative is an aftermarket device that you can build maybe with a 3D printer so that it can snap on, so that when you're in an area where that just has mice, we can convert our rat-sized bait station into a mouse control station by popping on these little extra doors to reduce the size. And I've just done a little, PowerPoint thing here to show you the size reducer. Think about the potential market for that, right? Because you have to have a set of two for all the different brands of devices that are out there. I think someone could of all the three ideas that I've put out there, this one clearly has probably the largest market because there's a lot of ideas. And how would you market it? You would say, because this is a way of being more green, right? In the sense we're trying to reduce these toxic chemicals from getting out into the exposed to non-target animals, right? And it doesn't require an EPA regulation to do. This is something we can do as an industry to be ahead of the curve, right? And it's a low lift. How expensive would it be to have these? And if you build good ones, they're going to last a while, right? And not be so expensive. And people, technicians can carry them in their pocket, for crying out loud. All right. Those are the three ideas. Let me go through them again for you. Again, a reservoir baiter for a prairie dog, an inverted T bait station made out of steel or aluminum, and then lastly, hole reducers for our rat-sized bait stations to convert them into using them for mice. Marketing, I've already said, is very important and needs to be done. But if you're interested in moving forward with this and you're wanting to banter around the ideas, reach out to me, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Please, only do it if you're really serious and you have the capability, okay? I'm happy to talk to you. Not going to charge anything for this. I want these products to be developed by someone. If you're needing someone to test them, definitely reach out to me. Would be happy to participate in helping you do this. I want you to be successful because I think these products are needed. You can disagree, but nevertheless, you don't have to build them. But if you are interested, I'm willing to help in that regard. Thank you for listening to this podcast today. We're trying to expand this industry, this important industry that does wildlife control, vertebrate pest control for the people, because you do important work protecting property and health and safety and people's well-being. Always remember that you are a valuable participant in society, even though you don't get the respect and credit that you frequently deserve. All right, well, that's enough for me today. If you have ideas, thoughts, comments, definitely reach out to me. Of course, I've already given my email multiple times, so I won't do it again. Would like you to subscribe to the podcast, of course, and give us a thumbs up. Of course, you can always put comments down below. Would love to hear from you. Until next time, take care, everyone.
This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant Podcast. Vertebrate pest control is an inherently dangerous activity involving risk of bodily injury to you, others, and or property. Vertebrate pest control also involves legal issues, so be sure to always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods when controlling pests. Wildlife Control Consultant LLC, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their affiliates are not responsible for your use of the information provided here. Always consult a qualified and appropriate professional before employing the information provided here.